Yeah, perfect. Okay. So I've prepared a little bit of content tonight. Obviously, the theme of this evening session is really about investing in property and how you can build assets for income generation. And this session today is very much aimed at those people who are fairly early on in their careers, or maybe fairly on in a business. Also, people who've got perhaps a young family, people who are considering perhaps getting closer to retirement, or even those who are perhaps a little bit more serious into property investing, and they also want to work with others. So each week we try and choose a different theme, and it's very much under the context of helping people to create income acquiring assets, to focus on reducing their monthly costs, to increase their disposable income, and where possible to use leverage to amplify those gains. So I won't say too much about myself this evening, because I think a number of you know me already, but I founded the Wealth Growth Club about 3 years ago. A bit of a stereotypical entrepreneur, not always got everything right, but also enjoyed doing lots of good things as well. And in terms of tonight, the principles of what we're sharing today are very much based around what Robert Kiyosaki talks about in what's called the cash flow quadrant. And very briefly on this, we have a much more detailed session on this, but obviously the first time is very much for those people who are perhaps in a traditional job. Clearly in those circumstances, you can't really leverage your time. You get paid for what you do, you go home again, and then you go back again the following day. And the bottom left-hand quadrant is very much for those who are self-employed. It could be somebody who's in the professional services side or coaching. It could equally be a mechanic or an engineer or a consultant. Now, I'm not sure 100% agree with Robert Kiyosaki saying here now, because the world's changed. When the book was written 20 years ago, Rich Dad Poor Dad, of course, we didn't have the benefit of being able to use a lot of cloud-based services now, or benefit from being able to outsource and all these other good things which are available to us today. But nevertheless, the general principles are still there. And of course, the top right-hand quadrant is very much aimed at those people who've created a business which has got beyond the initial phase. So you may have perhaps 5 or 10 people working for you, maybe a lot more, perhaps 50, 100. And typically in those scenarios, you've already created a range of systems. You've got a well-trained workforce. You've put strategies in place to leverage and grow. And you perhaps also put strategies in place to increase the multiple you might be able to achieve for your business should you want some future exit. And then the bottom right-hand quadrant is around those people who are more into investing and getting money to work for them. Now, traditionally, we perhaps think of property in that space, but of course, it could apply to someone who's created some assets which build on license fees, or have created a franchise model to grow and scale their business, and also that of their franchisees. It could be you've created a patent. It could be you set up a software as a service business, in which case you've got a continual flow of revenue coming each month, and so on. And as much as possible, where you can, it's great if you can get at least into the one, or if not two, of the right-hand quadrants. So we'll obviously touch on that a little bit more in other weeks. And it's very much under this overall principle. So these 4 graphics on the right are very much designed to tie in with the 2 right-hand graphics on the right of that chart. So sort of moving on a little bit from there, there's a bit of debate about Albert Einstein, whether he actually said this or whether someone else did, but nevertheless is this statement I'm sure we do agree with. If we can put strategies in place to create recurring revenue streams, obviously that helps us to put us in a position where we can compound what we're doing and put ourselves in a much more secure position further on. Now, I'm just going to show this screen very briefly. It's not so relevant for today because we're not talking about the sort of financial products per se, but nevertheless, we are going to there is a bit around property investing. So it is worth that people should know that obviously all elements of investing, whatever it is, carries elements of risk, and obviously, sometimes it could appear that you can make some very considerable gains. And we all know what happens when the market suddenly turns on us, or if you have to choose the wrong thing to invest in. So everyone needs to be aware of the risks with anything that they do basically in life. So, and clearly what we want to do, and unfortunately I fell victim of this, and a number of other people did as well, but none of us want to get caught up in the Ponzi-nomics of a lot of the opportunities that actually exist out there as well. So it's about trying to find good, solid projects. So today's session is very much about property investing. using other people, and where possible, using other people's money to build assets and for income generation. And obviously, again, the world's changed quite a bit around that, especially in the the last few months, which no doubt we'll debate a little bit tonight. And what I'll do is I'll run through some of this content, but I'll pause in a few minutes just so we can also have a bit of a discussion around it. But here are a few examples of what can be done in the property space. But the big thing with this is you're largely in control. So if you choose to perhaps buy a property, with a view to letting it out, or it might be that you choose, as part of your strategy, is that you rent a property with a view to renting that out to other people. And we'll discuss strategies around that as well. And also scenarios which are based around rent to buy, rent with lease options, renting property out with based around housing multiple occupancy, how you can use service accommodation, for example, AirBnB, and equally how you could get involved in partnerships and deal sourcing as well. And I can show you as well a bit later on how you get access to. It's not an app I've created or anything. There's a very good property investor app out there which you can get access to on your mobile phone. So, and under this principle, it's about using a property. It's a slightly different emphasis on this. So about acquiring assets to generate income, to create, consider using leverage, namely to buy more assets so you can keep on rinsing and repeating. Obviously, if you can do that, you're starting to create a really interesting portfolio, as it were. So just touch a little bit on this today. Obviously, when acquiring property, most people will be aware that you've got different types of mortgage, whether it's repayment or interest only. Sometimes if you don't have much in the way of assets, or it may be you want to balance your portfolio a little bit, by having a rent to rent, as it were, so you're renting might be a property, you come to an arrangement with the landlord where you may agree perhaps a 3 or 5 year rental and say, well, look, I'd like to take the responsibility for that. I might even do a little bit in the way of refurbishment, and then I'll then manage the whole process for you. And then obviously I keep the difference in the gains, but also I'll be taking the risks on this as well. With a rent to buy, it's a bit like the analogy there, I guess, really. It's a bit like you come to arrangement with a landlord that you perhaps pay a bit more than quite a bit more than a commercial rent. But each month you actually pay in excess of a given amount, but that actually is going in some shape or form to acquiring the asset further down the line. And I'll touch on that a bit more in a moment, actually. Then obviously you've got shared ownership where you may partner up with other people to acquire property. And closely associated to rent to buy, you've got renting with a lease option. So typically with a lease option, in that scenario, you would want to run it for typically about 7 years, might be up to 10 years. So in that scenario, the clue is in the word option there. What it basically enables you to do is to maybe that you found a property which is a good property, but it may have, for whatever reason, got very tired. Maybe the current owner of the property who's letting the property out hasn't maintained it well. They're having difficulty renting it out. So in that scenario, you might say, well, look, I'll take over this. I'll take over the internal repairs of the building. I might even make a number of improvements. I might even apply to change its status, which we'll come on to a little bit more. And then what you can do is you might say agree a 7 or 10 year rental. You agree to make a certain amount of refurbishments, and then you agree a predetermined price right at the outset of which you're prepared to buy the property at. And the clue is the word option. It's not an obligation in that scenario. So you could, in theory, get to year 7 and decide not to exercise your option to buy the property. But by definition, if it's done in the right way, because you would have actually invested a lot of money in improving the property, then it's a way of you being able to acquire an asset over a period of time. So it's a little bit different, but these opportunities do still exist today. And obviously, sort of touching on this a little bit, well, let's move a little bit more into the service accommodation. We've got scenarios here which are taking the property and applying for perhaps a license. In some areas, you're required to actually apply to the local council to actually have be able to convert it to a house of multiple occupancy. It's where you've got 4 people or more renting a property. In certain areas, it's becoming more and more common now. You have to apply to the council to get their agreement that they will agree to allow for that property converted for that use. Obviously, it is in many cases in the council's interest, because typically where there's a demand for that is where there's not enough property in that area anyway. Obviously, you can think of lots of cases, perhaps like university towns, etc., where there are many houses which are houses of multiple occupancy. And then obviously you've got other types as well, which could be looked at, which are things like where you acquire a property, perhaps which is either in a good state of repair, or you are prepared to invest quite a bit in it to bring it up to a very high standard, in which case it could be good for an Airbnb, or equally using something like booking.com. You could, for example, consider service accommodation. Now, this may be that in that scenario, it's a longer term let. It might be a let of up to 6 or 12 months. It may be that it's already very well furnished. So it's not quite like an Airbnb, because it's designed for a shorter term, a slightly longer term rent, but it may not fall under the full rental, that would be if you were renting a property normally, which was unfurnished, for example. And then obviously you've got property sourcing. Now, if you were going to go into the property sourcing space, these days you actually need to, even though you, the property sourcing may only be acting as an introducer, and then walk away from it. For example, you might find a property and then introduce it to some investors. In that scenario, you do actually have to, by law, apply to be an estate agent, in effect, and you also have to register with HMRC as well, which I think costs you have the great privilege of paying HMRC £360 a year for the privilege of acting as almost their agent, but that's another matter. But it's a requirement of the law, and you also require to register with the property ombudsman, even if you are, in that scenario, you may be representing the buyer. But as far as HMRC is concerned, as far as the law is concerned, they see you as being an estate agent, but even though you may be representing the buyer in that scenario. So it's just worth bearing that in mind. I think what might be good, actually, just to pause for a second, because I never like to talk too much, although people probably don't believe that. But let's try and bring this back. Wait a second. There we go. Right, so Keith, you've seen about this very well. I think we lost Eric along the way. Valerie, I don't know whether you've got any questions you would like to ask, or anything, any points you'd like to make so far, or Andrew, or?
No, not really at the moment. I mean, I do let out a room sometimes Airbnb wise, but not actually a whole property. So I know how the Airbnb system works.
Right, and has it been very successful for you?
It has been successful. I mean, I probably did it about maybe 8 or 9 months ago, but because I wanted continuous income coming into the property, I ended up taking a short leasehold tenancy agreement with someone.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So that's kind of guaranteed income, with a 3-month notice period. So that's kind of worked quite well to provide additional income.
And from your point of view, has that given you a degree of protection against some of the recent changes that have occurred, which our new administration has chosen to bring in, so that tenants don't have the same level of security, or you avoid a scenario where someone becomes a sitting tenant in some shape?
Yeah, I know. That is one of the interesting ones now, isn't it, really? You've got to be extremely careful. You just can't throw somebody out now, I know. But we, at the end of the day, our tenant is good. He's very he keeps himself to himself. He's in his room most of the time, apart from when he comes down and cooks. And it's easy money, really, coming into your bank account.
Nice. So it's presumably fully furnished, is it?
Oh, it's furnished, yes. Well, furnished in terms of a bedroom, yes. Yeah, yes. In terms of a bedroom. But he doesn't use the public areas of the house. He just uses the bedroom and goes to work, uses the kitchen, and obviously the bathroom, etc. And otherwise, it works well.
Nice. Oh, that's really good.
Andrew, effectively, it's a one-room lodger then.
Correct.
So you're claiming the 7,500 allowable?
Yes.
Income. Yeah.
Correct. Absolutely right.
As high as 7,500 now. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
That's it. That's what it's about. 4,500.
It's a bedroom, as long as you're living in the premises.
Yes, correct.
Rent out a bedroom for up to 7,500 tax-free.
Yes, indeed.
That's interesting. You taught me something. Effectively, like update on that, Keith. I should know that one, shouldn't I? So
they basically pay £600 a month, which is under that threshold, which is great.
Yeah. Good. No, excellent.
I was slightly surprised, Rupert, that you've put deal sourcing in the list as well, which is totally separate from property ownership, of course.
Yes, but there's often a cross analogy there, in the sense that many people who are property investors also will help find properties for other people, so they can fall into the area of deal sourcing in its own right. Now, lots of the time it can be very casual, in which case perhaps people don't bother to register, but officially, they go to the guidelines. If you do any form of deal sourcing, you are supposed to be registered. And I've got an account on this call, by the way, Andrew, so I've got to make sure my P's and Q's are correct.
Can we just correct that? You've got a property tax accountant on this call.
Property tax. They're very good. That's true. That's a better definition.
I mean, for example, the biggest thing to watch out for on the purchase lease option you referred to, or I think you called it a rent lease option.
Well, it's rent to rent, and there's you can acquire property through a lease option.
Yeah.
The obligation is a lease option. Yes.
The biggest issue with a purchase lease option is to make sure you get it right from a CGT point of view. Otherwise, if the paperwork's wrong, you could end up with a CGT bill way before you've bought the house.
Right. Yes. Yes. And this is where the devil's in the detail in the license agreement.
The devil's really in using the right sort of property-focused lawyer, not just your local conveyancing solicitor.
No. Well, it typically is a separate agreement altogether, isn't it? Which is thank you for that. Valerie, I don't know whether you've got any questions you want to flag up or any points you want to raise over that before we move on a bit more. And Renato has joined us as well. Welcome, Renato. You've also made the train.
Yes.
Okay. Whereabouts in the country at the moment, Renato?
In Euston Station of all
you're actually in Euston. Right. Okay. So you just arrived or just leaving?
Just leaving. But it's been a day. Okay. It's been a day of pandemonium because my Thames link to St Pancras International had about a quarter cancellations. And now, earlier in the day, I was in the new University of Buckingham arranging conference for May with people from around the world visiting as well. And then I had to get back to London and then go back up again. So I've managed the trials and tribulations of trains, and at least now I'm on a train with a very long journey, but a table, power, and internet.
Oh, brilliant. So where are you heading to?
Stoke-on-Trent.
Oh, wow.
Stoke-on-Trent. Wow, that's a journey.
Yeah.
It is. And it's normally 1 hour 40, but this is more like 2 hours 40.
Right. They give you dinner on the train as well.
We used to.
Yes, those were the days.
Yeah, you have to do your own now.
Oh, I see. Called a sandwich, yes. Very good. Okay, well, I think if everyone's happy, I'll perhaps just continue for the moment, and we'll perhaps break out again for a few minutes for any questions or any points that anyone wants to make. So just bear with me a second. There we go. Got it. Right. It's all coming back now. So we've already talked about this already, so moving on a little bit from there. Although I've lost my... Sorry. There we go. So just focusing a bit on the service accommodation side for a little bit. Obviously, where we've got property strategy where you're letting a property out on a nightly basis. So an example of that would be if you're going on holiday, you maybe book something with booking.com, or you might be, sorry about only wording this, it may be that you're going to some form of conference, or you're looking to have some form of experience, and therefore choosing accommodations. And then obviously, as we've just been touching on actually, when talking about service accommodation, with someone more of a guest, or are they more of a tenant? Are they short term or are they long term? And generally, if it's a short term, it can be much less intensive in terms of the legal aspects. If it's longer term, then of course there's quite a bit to it. The other side of the coin on that is with Airbnb, for example, it's getting more and more tricky, especially in certain countries or certain parts of the country as the regime changes. If, for example, you were looking at something like Airbnb, the important ratings are extremely important to consider. So as a minimum, people need to be looking for at least a 4-star rating, an absolute minimum, really trying to get a 5-star rating every time, because no one really, on the whole, no one normally likes to give a bad review. So people will tend to normally rate up their experience. So people will tend to be a lot more selective and look for properties which are 5-star, run 4-star, even though a property rated with 4 stars may actually be very good. So it's about making sure that the photos of the property you're letting out don't over-represent the property. You need to be very proactive with guests with Airbnb. Typically, for example, especially if you're in a tourist destination, it may well be you're having to help them to find different places to visit or to go to. And people can have a habit of turning up at all sorts of odd hours to come and collect their keys, which isn't normally necessarily very convenient. And obviously with something like Airbnb, it's really important that you use the right technology as well to streamline your operations. So, for example, laundry and professional photography, etc., for professional listings are clearly very important. And the areas which require particularly focusing are making sure that your any guest booking systems you've got are properly maintained, always up to date. Perhaps you've got key boxes so that you haven't always got to be on call to hand over the key when someone turns up, for the reason we just discussed. It may be that you want some form of automated messaging for when guests check in and check out. And it's also important to understand the nightly rate, and the percentage occupancy, and make sure that things like linen, do you want to buy your linen for the bedrooms or do you want to hire it? What's the difference would be if you're hiring it, typically the company hiring it from would actually do the laundry as well. Communication is recommended to use things like WhatsApp as a way of communicating with guests, because it means that people are less likely to call you. They're much more likely to message you, which tends to be less intrusive. So obviously you could use cameras, but you have to be very careful with that, because sometimes people feel their privacy is being invaded. Quite often what people will do is they may not use cameras, or if they do, they might just have one on the outside when someone's going in or out of the property. But they might have some form of noise monitor. Now what that means, it's not something that's got so much of a microphone attached, it's more if decibel levels go above a certain rate. So because sometimes what you can find, if someone's got a property which is suitable for 2 guests, for example, you find they go and organise a party, and perhaps you've got 4, 6, 10 people turning up to share a small unit, and then you can start to get problems with neighbours, understandably. So basically those type of devices can give you some more advanced warning that perhaps noise levels are getting above a certain point. So you're not necessarily being intrusive. You're not being intrusive because you're not listening to the conversations, but it just means if you're starting to get some alerts around that, it means that possibly it'd be worth going around to the property and making sure everything is as it should be. So it can just save a few headaches. And then obviously anything to do with rental, it's really important to manage your cash flow carefully and doing all the calculations, comparing the service accommodation to single lets, looking at your occupancy rates and the impact on your income. For example, it may be at certain times of the year virtually impossible to rent out do an Airbnb because you may just not get the uptake that you actually want. Sorry, Ben, a second, just let someone else in. Okay, and then understanding what your break-even rates are, and also understanding your costs of cleaning, linen, and platform fees, etc. So, just bear me a second. Right, there we go, got it back again. So this is very much under the principles of what we talked about already. This is looking a little bit more at HMOs now. So a few examples of that would be licensed versus unlicensed. If it's under 4 rooms, generally you wouldn't normally need a license if it's a house of multiple occupancy, or it doesn't fall under that definition as far as the local authority is concerned. Obviously, the regime is changing quite quickly at the moment with all the changes coming in. And of course, local councils can have their own rules for these things as well. So it's always worth checking out. Clearly, student accommodation, if you found a property in a town where there's a lot of students, then that can give you a lot of surety over your ability to collect rent, because typically most landlords will actually require the parents to act as a guarantor. And also, if you get one person leave and it's suitable for 5 people, for example, then you're still collecting revenue from the other 4. So it can work quite well in that scenario. And we've already discussed the difference between Airbnb and the sort of general serviced accommodation. If also the interesting thing as well is if you've got a property, let's say you acquire a property and it's going to be for multiple occupancy. Just bear me a second. I think I need to let someone else back in again. Actually, sorry, was that you, Keith? Right, put your hand up. Is that right?
That was me. I was just going to say, with student accommodation, you normally contract with the students for a term or even a year. So yeah. if one leaves, often you don't lose your revenue. It's up to them to try and get a replacement, or they lose their money, or mum and dad lose the money.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, so you've got a lot of co-ops and a lot of extra security, which you wouldn't otherwise get. The only slight challenge you do have with student accommodation is quite often they're pretty good at sort of trashing the place as well. So
yeah, I think the downside with student accommodation is you've got students in your accommodation.
But if one student leaves, does that mean the other four, for example, if there's five in the house, have they got to make up the difference, or is it is it on the contract where the student that's left, it's up to the parents then to pay for the rest of the contract term?
Andrew, simple answer is it's down to the paperwork you've put in place.
Yeah.
But if you've got what I would call a sensible contract, it will require that student to have committed for the full, at least a term,
Yes.
probably a full year.
Yeah.
Right. So they have to pay come what may.
They have to pay, and it's therefore up to them to try and find someone to step into their place
Yeah.
to
Sure.
pick up the cost and reimburse them for the rest of the period.
Sure.
So it's down to get the right contracts in place, like anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I suppose the other benefit with something like the students as well is that you're unlikely to get a scenario where they have become a sitting tenant. I mean, technically it is possible, but it's far less likely where if you get someone and perhaps their circumstances change, perhaps they lose their job, for example, then it can be a devil of a job trying to, well, first of all, it's horrible for that person or that family, but it obviously can be very challenging for the landlords as well, especially under new rules which are being implemented as we speak, as it were. The other thing as well, which is an interesting thing with house multiple occupancy, if for example a house is being converted from sort of a normal let to something where you've got 3 or 4 different people who are actually say forming part of that house multiple occupancy, if you do things the right way, it is potentially possible to get your property revalued. So it's regarded differently. So that for example, if you've got gas central heating as a case in point, now on one hand that's a good thing for most people, but if you've got a house of multiple occupants and it's a student, so let's say you've got 5 or 6 students and you've applied for an HMO license, then it can sometimes be better to actually switch the central heating off or disable it and actually put in electric heaters into each room and then actually work it that the student is actually responsible for paying their own electricity, and they could then potentially do it so it's through some form meter. Now, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but if you make certain types of improvements, it can help for it to be regarded more for evaluation purposes with more of a commercial bias, and therefore it can enable you to remortgage the property to release equity in it, so you can use the funds gained to help you acquire another property. So, for example, you may have done the property up to be suitable for that, so that will have increased its value, and by actually then getting it revalued, you then can potentially release some of that gain to help you acquire some more assets. So obviously that's quite a subject for debate, but it's just an interesting point. We've sort of talked a little bit about the difference on HMOs already, and we've also talked about the importance of checking the location as well if you were thinking of doing house occupancy, because a lot of councils have got rules on this now as well. And also that can have a bearing on conversions too. The other thing, which is we thought this had gone away, but I think it's coming back again, is that under the Conservative government, that I think it was that guy, I've forgotten his name, the one that would always remind me of Kermit the Frog, who put the knife in Boris Johnson's back.
Michael Gove.
That's it, Michael Gove. Yes, he tried to introduce a change about 4 or 5 years ago, I believe, and that was that all properties which were to be rented out had to fall with an energy rating of band A, B, or C and above. And then over time, I think there was a bit of a backlash in the Conservative Party, and that was abolished because of the fear of what it would actually do to the rental market. Because obviously a lot of properties, especially if they've been let out over a period of time, and especially HMOs as well, would not fall under a B, or C category. Many of them would be a D or an E, because they may be properties which are Victorian, and typically, draft exclusion and energy conservation was very much not at the forefront of people's minds then. My understanding is, and Keith, you might know the answer, or possibly Andrew, I don't know. There's been talk, I know, about the Labour government of actually reintroducing this legislation, what Michael Gove had actually planned to do a few years ago. Have either of you heard any more about that, or anyone heard any more about that? So I'm interested.
I saw an interesting statistic recently which said that if they did impose it now, something like 70% of all buy-to-lets and HMOs would fail the EPC C test.
Yes.
So the interesting thing, gentlemen, today was I actually had my property energy tested today.
Oh, did you?
Because my certificate expired in February 2021. And so I thought I would get it retested because I've introduced certain things like double glazing, new boiler, low energy lighting, etc. And it's very interesting that because I'm in a boarding Victorian property, that my building will stay as a band D, because obviously they're looking at the external walls. There's no cavity walls. There is where I am here, because it was an extent. We went into the loft and we went out. So those little bits that went out and up the loft were cavity based. So that was good. But the majority of the property is just bricks and no cavity in between there. So it comes as a low energy rating. So I stay as a level D.
Right.
However, he did mention that secondary heating, things like an open fireplace, if you've got an open fireplace and the residents are using an open fireplace, that is deemed to be a bad thing, because they're going to use the open fireplace as opposed to central heating, which is a good thing for energy rating. So he did suggest that we would go up to a band C if we actually had our fireplace sealed. However, if you have your fireplace sealed, then obviously if there was moisture coming down the chimney, then you could get damp.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, it's far better to remain as a category D rather than go up just into the category C, purely because we're going up to category and we're blocking up the fireplace to prevent heat going through the chimney.
And you can imagine, Andrew, if you were compelled to go to a C because you want to convert to an HMO, for example, you'd probably have quite a bit of expense to lay out.
Exactly, and also the possibility of having excess damp as well through the chimney, which isn't a good thing for the building anyway.
No.
And the concern for the government is if they bring in that C, they're going to have a lot of people who can't afford to do the upgrades necessary, which means we end up with a lot of property taken off the market.
Yeah.
Yes.
In a market where we're short of accommodation for people.
Yeah, exactly.
So yes, it's a rather nonsense, really, the whole thing. But have the Labour Party, this question I'm asking you guys actually, especially Keith, I was thinking a specialist accountant, to put it that way. Have they actually committed to doing this yet, or is it still very much under debate? I don't think I've seen anything go through Parliament yet to do with it, but
no, they keep on going on about it, improving the situation for the renter. They just haven't decided which part of the population they want to turn against them.
yeah.
I mean, at the moment they're concentrating on getting the pensioners to hate them. So
Oh dear.
if they come down on the side of the renter, it's bad for the landlords, and it could be bad for the renter if they end up with less accommodation available to renters. There's no, like any government, there's no win-win situation for them.
Oh dear.
But they've got 4.5 years to sort it out.
Well, true. Okay, just a couple more things which are just worth considering around this as well, around HMOs. Obviously, there are minimum room size requirements which have to be considered, and amenities and safety standards, fire safety, for example, doors, alarms, emergency lighting have to be considered. And it may well be you have to keep pest control and maintenance records as well of the property. These can be all sort of hidden costs. And then as far as that's concerned, you've got different models based around all-inclusive, where all bills are included in the rent, non-exclusive, where tenants pay their own bills, and partially inclusive. And we've already talked about this a little bit, but HMOs can be valued based on bricks and mortar valuation, i.e. the physical property value, or a commercial basis, i.e. taking into account the rental income the property generates. If you can increase your income yields and your asset values, then this can make it highly profitable, even in a market which actually is not very much in your favour. So that's more or less the part I plan to cover today. What I was just going to really touch on, perhaps we could just open it up a little bit more for discussion in a bit, is this is part of a series on different topics. Last week we looked at different aspects, mainly to do with crypto and mining as well in that particular space. But again, avoiding anything to do with the Ponzinomics that exists out there as well. This week is around property, and we're going to have a bit of a different theme next week. And so doing a little bit around personal growth, which is coming up fairly soon. We've got 3 modules, 3 weeks, which are going to be based around business growth. And you can see the subjects there, which are lined up for discussion. And then we've got wealth growth, and also another parts of wealth growth, which we'll be covering in future weeks. And again, it's all under this overall framework, which we're tying it back to. So, what I was going to really say is, we obviously, as you'd expect, we do have some peer-based groups that are very keen to support. The other thing is, if someone is seriously considering about property investing, there's someone who I work very closely with by the name of Osh. He's got his own portfolio of, I think, over 100 properties now in total. But he does do a mixture of deal sourcing, rent-to-rent, lease options, and obviously buys property and owns properties outright as well. And he's also the one that's created something called the Property Investor app. Now, just for some moving on a little bit, if you've got your camera phone handy, which might be useful for you, Keith, I don't know. So I'm going to try and put this in the chat as well. I'm just going to put the link in the chat. Bear me a second. There's the link. But if you were to hold your phone up to that QR code, it'll bring you up to a LinkTree. And for example, if you want to join the WhatsApp group, it's literally the first button from that LinkTree. The second one, it ties in with the link for the webinar sessions that we run most Wednesdays at 7 o'clock GMT. Sorry, the third link does that actually. We've got like a catch-up recording or webinar, which is the second button. If you want to go to the YouTube channel, you press the fourth one down. If you want to book a discovery call, which is completely free, then it's the one with the green circle around it. If you are interested in the mentoring program, then that's available for discussion. We can arrange that later on. And that obviously ties in with a Calendly type system if you want to book something in. So, actually, I've realised that I think Renato and Valerie have made some points. Let me just stop the sharing to bring everyone back. I'm just trying to see if I've covered everything. Bear me a second. Right. Valerie, is Valerie still here? No, we've lost her actually. She did ask a question about avoiding paying council tax or avoiding paying council bedroom tax with only weekly guests. Does that mean anything to you, Keith? Particularly, how do you avoid paying council?
No disrespect, but it does tell me there's another person out there who believes there is a tax called bedroom tax. There is not a tax called bedroom tax.
No.
The so-called bedroom tax is a newspaper headline, which has come from the cutting of benefits if you have too many deemed to be spare rooms in your house.
Right.
So if there's two of you in a 4-bedroom house, for example, and you're on benefits, they slash your benefits by about 25%, I think it is.
Oh, right. Okay.
But it has got that nickname of bedroom tax.
Right. Okay. It's probably one of the Tory papers or something like that. The matter it's been referred to. I'm not sure. Sorry, Adrian. I only just saw you come online actually this evening, but welcome anyway tonight. Obviously, Eric, Adrian, Renato, Andrew, Keith. Any comments that any of you want to make at all? Anything you want to share?
I wanted to say, we know we were talking about Airbnb. Just in case anybody has any complaints that are made by guests when they're staying as an Airbnb guest, never dialogue with the guest if there's a complaint. Only dialogue directly with Airbnb, and that's when if you can get a refund, you'll always get it through Airbnb, and you'll get the maximum refund with Airbnb. Rather than if you do try and deal direct with the guest, it's unlikely that you'll get the full refund or compensation that you deserve.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting.
I've had a situation because I got married 2 years ago, and we stayed in a 5-bedroom house in Folkestone, and we dealt directly with the owner of the property, and we got less compensation because we dealt directly with them and did the deal with them rather than going through Airbnb.
That's interesting.
How do you know you got less?
Because basically the Airbnb told us so.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you.
Yeah,
No problem at all.
yeah.
The difference is you're dealing with a person who actually wants to own the money, whereas the person who's just an employee of Airbnb.
Exactly. And they've got much more to lose with Airbnb than they have with you directly, because you've got a single contract with Airbnb, and the contract between them is far greater because they could lose lots of business.
Yeah.
As a result of it.
Yeah, it's interesting you raised that point actually, because I've forgotten about it until you just mentioned it now. But I remember we went to the States about 4 or 5 years ago, and we stayed in an Airbnb. And actually, it was very nice. We really liked the place, but there were a few problems, like for example, the central heating didn't work properly, and a couple of other things. And we didn't want to complain particularly about it, but we did want to speak to the owner to see what we could first of all fix the problems, but also in the end we actually negotiated a little bit of a reduction with them as well. So the purpose wasn't to get anyone into trouble, it was just more about a bit of recognition. And in fairness, the owner of the property was actually really good at sorting things out. But I didn't know about the other point though, but of course that's entirely true, isn't it? Because people have spent a lot of money getting their properties listed on Airbnb. That could be a really important area of revenue for them if they lose it. Because
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's lots on that's been very good to learn. Two things tonight, actually. Adrian, sorry, I'm not sure you're in to speak or not. Is there anything you would like to flag up?
No, so I'm just first time, so just listening and taking it all in at the moment. So
Okay.
yeah, very interesting. But thank you.
All right, mate. Yeah. Also, I think you might miss the beginning. We probably will make a recording available. Are you in the WhatsApp group?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay. We'll probably make a recording available in the next few days. So that's already down a little bit, but try and put that out when we can. Right. Any final thoughts before we call it a wrap? No? All right.
I'll give you a final thought. I was at a property investors group last night, and one of the things I say to them about tax is that it's too easy for me to make money out of people who've made tax mistakes because they haven't considered the tax when they've gone into the issue, which means they've got big tax bills that they weren't expecting. So it's always worthwhile to take the time and effort to understand the taxes that will apply to you before you go ahead. You could argue the same applies to any business, but it's more important with property, especially when the goalposts are moving all the time.
I got into property back in 2004, and it was a bit of a wild west back then. And you could self-certify your income. And quite apart from that, I so wish I had been informed, Keith, because I didn't set up a limited company, and all the properties were in my own name. I've now sold them, and I'm now going to be clobbered with a giant capital gains tax. As a result. So really good advice there as well. Yeah, it's interesting. I guess if in fairness to you, Eric, when you acquired all these properties some time ago, it was the rules changed presumably many times after you acquired the bulk of your portfolio. I'd imagine, is that right? I didn't quite follow what you said.
Yeah. So, for example, I know you got rid of sold about 10 or 11 properties, didn't you? Presumably you'd had a lot of those properties for some time, and you've probably seen lots and lots of pieces of new legislation coming through.
So many.
Really caught you out.
Yeah.
So,
and it's funny because if I was getting into the business now, I would be completely unaware of all those changes. I'd be aware of them, the legislation, but I wouldn't be aware of the fact that they had changed during that time, if that makes any sense. And therefore I'd be like, fine. But as they kept changing, it was just like, heck, this is not fun anymore. That's how I kind of saw it. But also I have some medical issues as well. I just want to de-stress my life completely. Yeah. But it's really interesting now that I kind of got out of the game, and now I'm interested in getting back in, but in a different capacity. So yeah.
How would it change? How would it change as far as the future is concerned, Eric?
How so? What
in terms of, you mentioned you may want to come back in a different capacity.
It's a good question. I think that there's different options. I'd be more interested in commercial property. As you know, I'm interested in buying properties and developing them for other purposes like battery storage, and then developing the planning permission and then selling it on without actually developing the battery storage, but just having the planning permission, increasing the value of the property. That would be a couple of examples. I would stay away from HMOs because there's just so much legislation with them, and you're dealing with more people as well. And the more people involved, the more complex things get. Some people are willing to put up with that, but I've gotten to the age now where I want an easy life. Yeah. And there are easier options within property. So yeah, and I'm only just realizing that. So yeah, I'm sitting outside of the game and looking back in and going, maybe I'll re-enter in a different capacity. Yeah. Interesting.
Property development's a good move if you've got a reasonable chunk of cash and don't need monthly income.
Yeah, I'm also just to further my answer to you, Rupert, and to add to what you were saying, Keith, I'm looking at joint ventures, people who are finding exciting projects, but who want to share the burden of the cost. There is risk, of course, and the more risk, the higher the risk, the higher return. Usually it equates that way. And I'm fortunate. I'm in a position where I can spread my risks from low risk to medium to high, and have it in a number of pots.
Yeah,
nice.
Does that answer your question, Rupert?
Yeah, no, it's very these are interesting. Yeah, I'd love to learn more about all your future developments in that over the coming weeks and months. So good, excellent. Thank you, Renata. You've been very quiet this evening, actually. I guess you're on a train. You're also trying to eat a sandwich at the same time. But
yes, keeping the background noise down for you.
Yeah.
I hope you're traveling first class there, Renato. Are you first class?
To be a good investment, but no more.
That's funny.
Yeah, but it may have been interesting, though, the Airbnb comment I put in the chat, that friends I'm going to see in March in Barcelona told me it's really destroyed the property market there,
Yes.
because it's forced up the price of properties, so the local people find their children can't afford to live in Barcelona anymore, and it's become a real issue for the government there, and they're looking at having potentially a two-tier price system for those who are local and a higher price for those who buy in from outside.
Right, wow. Actually, it's interesting you said that, because my sister, who lives in Portugal at the moment, she has said they've got a similar thing which is happening in Portugal, especially around Lisbon and major cities like that. So to do with Airbnb. So it's it's a good one, that one.
We've got the same issue in this country if you look at certain parts of Cornwall and Devon.
Yes, I remember friends in Cornwall saying the same. Yes, they said years ago it was coming for Cornwall, so it eventually got there. Good.
The only problem with differential pricing is the way they'll have to do that is by the local council subsidising prices, which means putting an extra loading on the council tax or their equivalent. So it's a big issue. We're encouraging people to have all these little businesses that buy up houses, and it takes the houses out of availability for the general population.
Yeah. Another big problem for a new administration to deal with. Not they need anymore.
I will throw one idea in to the pot. If anyone's thinking about HMOs, do not go for bulk standard HMOs. Do not go for cheap student accommodation. Go for something like a high quality, what they call a co-living HMO. They call it a co-living space, and steer clear of the HMO term, but it's the same. You do a very high quality fitting out of the property, and you can charge much higher rents than most HMOs, and you also, dare I say it, get a much higher quality of tenant.
Yes.
In terms of
actually, I'm glad you did that, because I covered that a little bit more in the serviced accommodation. However, I didn't elaborate more on that. And I do know of a franchise which runs very successfully, who guides their franchisees in acquiring property, typically where they would have at least 6 or 7 bedrooms, but kitting them up to a very high standard, including all the furnishings and bedding and everything, and therefore make it a very desirable place for people to live. Which is that's a really interesting point.
The other option is medium to high quality HMOs that you then let out to the local council, because they've got to house so many people themselves, and you've then got the council guaranteeing the income.
Yes, although quite often they will lay out what the terms are, and their terms aren't necessarily very attractive, though, are they?
Well, I don't know. I've got a friend who's just he's just rented out an HMO which I think has 6 bedrooms, and he's making 46,000 profit a year on it.
Right.
So can be good money, and he's got a 5-year contract, by the way, with the council.
True, that's a big plus.
And what's the tax implication on that 46,000?
Well, it just goes into the pot and gets taxed the same way as any other income.
Right.
There's no special tax terms or anything.
Right.
Except he's bringing it into a limited company, of course, because he takes advice from his tax accountant. And therefore it's taxed as company income rather than personal income. Full relief on mortgages, no Section 24. And he can leave it in the company and reinvest it. It's only when he starts taking it out of the company, of course, as dividends, it starts getting more expensive from a tax point of view. He's in it for the long term.
Yeah. That's interesting. Actually, there's been a bit of a clue on something today. I haven't seen the headline properly, but I think, am I correct in saying there's 2 different banks that actually decided to close down several hundred branches today? Announced today. I'm not, which one was it? I can't remember. But I think
Barclays announced that.
Did they? Because there's quite a good opportunity with those bank branches to basically acquire those type of buildings, and you may have got the ground floor, which is already classed as for office use, being a bank, and upstairs you've frequently got something which is either residential or very easy to turn into residential. So I know a number of property investors have been acquiring old bank branches as part of their portfolio, and they're making that as part of their mix. But that's just a bit of a throwaway comment that I just made. Yeah, so.
You must have been in the Wetherspoons sometime. Rupert.
Sorry?
You must have been in the Wetherspoons. Tim Martin's been buying up old banks for years and converting them.
And opera houses in Tunbridge Wells.
Oh, is that right?
Yes. I've been in there.
Oh, right. I didn't know that. Well, I should know that being a local, but there we go.
Exactly.
Yeah, Tim Martin's been buying banks, old cinemas, as you say, opera houses, anything big that you can lots of tables and chairs in. The downside of buying banks, of course, is what you do with that massive great vault. Because how do you get that
It's a
out?
secure safe room. I was just going to say that. It may be useful the way the world's going.
Yeah, if you advertise it as a safe room, that adds £200 a month to the rent for each tenant who gets to use it.
Oh, well, that's true.
As long as they can open it from the inside.
Yeah.
And an oxygen supply as well.
It's interesting. We've got a large post office that closed in Basingstoke here, and it's now being converted to 26 flats.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
One post office.
No. One
Because you don't realise on the high street that you see so many feet across the front of the building, you don't see how deep those buildings can be. So going back to what Eric was saying about possibility of getting into development, yeah, high street development, keep a couple of small shops on the front, extend residential out the back and residential above. It's a good money spinner.
Yeah, that's some good tips there.
But it's not quick money. You've got to wait a couple of years normally to do the development and get your money back.
There's also companies that are doing developments. Like my son came over here from San Francisco. He's a millennial, and he rented a room in what was arguably a high rise. As you walk into the building, there's this it's beautifully done in very, very modern decoration. It's like a big atrium, lots of little cubicles and seats and sofas where you can be on your laptop. And there's a bar and there's a gym and there's a pool. But when you go upstairs to the rooms are like Japanese shoe boxes. They're teeny tiny. And this is where people want now. They want that communal, that space where they can get logged on and do their business downstairs. But upstairs, it's just a sleeping area. Yeah. It's quite interesting. And
Eric,
there's a lot of those
this
buildings being built. And
is exactly the concept behind the co-living. Because the co-living means you've got to be very careful about getting the right set of tenants who will be able to live together, because they will spend a lot of their free time in the open spaces, the shared spaces, and as you say, a little bit of time in the box room, which sometimes is barely bigger than it goes back to the minimum space requirements.
Yeah, lovely. All right, well, thank you very much. Yes, thanks very much for joining in this evening. We'll hopefully see you next week. So welcome everyone anyway, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.